Date with a Debut is a Words and Nerds and Breathe Art podcasts co-production recorded on a Wagnical country. And I pay my respects to all elders, past and present, and extend that to any First Nations people tuning in. Always was, always will be, Aboriginal land. On with the show.
One of the things I've thought a lot about in writing the novel was that I wanted to write something that had a transgender protagonist, and that certainly was about issues around that kind of identity, but wasn't solely about that.
Welcome to Date with a Debut, a podcast about debut authors, their incredible books, and their journey to publication. If you are looking for a new author to discover or writing inspiration for your own story and you don't know where to start, this is the place to be. I'm Nick Wasiliev, author of When Men Cry and your host for today's show, and I'm delighted to welcome another debut author in today's episode. If you enjoy the show, or indeed any other shows on the Words and Nerds platform, jump online and give us a thumbs up, a 5-star review, wherever you are listening. Thank you for listening to us and for supporting the Australian book industry. You can also find any books mentioned in today's podcast down in the description. In today's episode, I'm joined by Ernest Price, whose work has previously been published in Queer Stories and Overland. He works as a secondary English teacher in Naarm, also known as Melbourne. But we're here today to talk about his debut novel, The Pyramid of Needs, published by Affirm Press, which you can get a copy of right now down in the description. I started off by asking Ernest about his own story and also the importance of releasing this book on the Trans Day of Visibility, the 31st of March. Before we begin this podcast, this episode does discuss topics of transphobia and mental health that some readers and listeners may find distressing, so discretion is advised. This episode was recorded on Gundungurra country. I am super delighted to welcome to the show Ernest Price. Ernest, welcome to Date with a Debut.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. I'm coming to you today from Boonwurrung country. Just wanting to pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the land that's never been ceded, and I am deeply respectful for my presence on that land today.
Before we get talking into this book, The Pyramid of Needs, in typical fashion, I was doing research on you and I got sidetracked by a story that you did on the ABC about when you talked about when you revealed you were a boy. That moment in your life that, like, just thinking about that moment, it would be hard to even say that to the people most closest to you, but you did it in a school gymnasium in front of 250 Year 10 students. Kind of daunting, but I also thought incredibly amazing and kind of awesome that you had that level of trust with your students was the first thought that came to my head when I heard that story.
I think, young people are so incredibly generous, and I think they get a bad rap a lot of the time. But I think teenagers, they are really on the hunt for authenticity and they want to see who you really are, and they're very quick to see through any kind of front. And if you show them, that vulnerability, they often respond with a lot of generosity. It doesn't mean it's perfect all the time, and certainly there have been young people who have been transphobic who I've interacted with, but by far the majority of the young people who either I came out to originally or who have, knowledge of my identity along the way have been incredibly respectful. And I think that it's provided a moment of connection, not necessarily because they themselves were trans or gender diverse, but because teenagers mostly just want people to be real with them. I'm not sure that's the language teenagers would use, but they want people who are willing to connect with them. And so the more that you hide from them, the more distance you create.
Are you still in touch with a lot of those students? Because obviously there was that's very, like, to divulge and be so honest with yourself in front of them. I'm imagining that you would have had a really close relationship with a lot of these kids.
Look, not huge volumes. I do have some contact. I'm always so delighted to hear from former students. I currently have a colleague in the school that I work in who was a member of that cohort of students, which makes me feel incredibly old that he's now finished multiple university degrees and teaching alongside me. But I'm really lucky to maintain contact with some of them. I had a number of former students come to the launch of the Pyramid of Needs, which was really lovely. And they weren't necessarily young people that I'd kept in touch with, but they'd sort of come across it on social media. Any contact from former students is always really lovely to hear. We get to see them for this window, this moment of their lives, and it's really great to see sort of what they become afterwards as well.
Yeah, God, time flies, doesn't it? When all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, it felt like yesterday I was teaching you, and now all of a sudden you're a colleague. It is so interesting because we're recording this in mid-April for context for our listeners, but this book came out on March 31st, which you picked deliberately. That's the Trans Day of Visibility. Tell us a little bit about that day, but also now that the book has now been out for a few weeks, has the reaction surprised you?
Yeah, it's a really interesting time, I guess, for the publication to coincide with that date, which is a date that has a kind of really fraught history. It got strange publicity this year because it also fell in the cycle of the Easter sort of celebration. It's the wrong word for Easter, but there's all sorts of misinformation about Trans Day of Visibility online that led to some really wild and wonderful conversations on Twitter. But I think for me, that day is very much a difficult day for a lot of people, because sometimes being visible as a trans person is not what people either want in terms of their own identity, or it comes with a danger attached to it as well, because visibility without like protection and celebration is actually a really difficult concept. But one of the things I've thought a lot about in writing the novel was that I wanted to write something that had a transgender protagonist, and that certainly was about issues around that kind of identity, but wasn't solely about that. Because I think one of the amazing things that's happened in the literary space, whether it's fiction, non-fiction, is that we've had lots of wonderful trans and gender diverse authors who have done so much work to build space for trans identities in literature. And so to me, it was really important, I guess, on that Trans Day of Visibility to say, here's a novel that, yes, is about partially what it is like for one person to be transgender, but it's also about all sorts of other things as well. So using, I guess, that step forward that, all of those people who've come before me have allowed to happen was really important. In terms of the reaction, that's going to be something I've talked to people about, the idea that there is a novel written by someone who is transgender that is about all sorts of other things as well, and that's a real privilege to be given to be able to write about those other things. From people in my own life who have read the novel, and certainly there's a tendency, I guess, to read it as almost autobiography, because there are very clearly elements of me in the book. But I think it's opened some eyes. I've had a number of people comment they hadn't thought about things like how much it might cost to medically transition, what it might be like to go to an airport as a transgender person, and these sort of day-to-day moments that I wanted to put into the book. So it's been really interesting to have people feed that back to me, that was something they hadn't thought about or considered before, despite the fact that, they're allies to the trans community.
So, with that in mind, let us rip off the Band-Aid and talk about this amazing book that you have created. I usually like to start with a 1-minute pitch. You told me beforehand that you have listened to a few episodes, so you're probably well versed in the process. What is the Pyramid of Needs about?
I'm going to start with the characters that it's about. In this was always my sort of 1-minute pitch, which is now coming with a preamble with the characters. So Linda Taylor is a 70-year-old wellness industry influencer. She falls and breaks a hip while she's creating content for Supreme Self, which is a supplement and vitamin peddling pyramid scheme in which Linda has invested her hopes, her dreams, and also her retirement savings. Jack Taylor is a transgender man in his late 30s, and he works as an English teacher many miles away from his mother. She's in Noosa, he's in Melbourne. When Linda breaks her hip, Jack's sister Alice urges him to head north to Noosa to make amends and to care for their parents. Despite her injury, however, Linda is really reluctant to face the realities of aging, and she's determined to make one last push for financial success through Supreme Self. Life begins to spiral for both Linda and her husband Peter, and their adult children are forced to make some really difficult decisions. Will they support Linda and her quest for, I guess, rebuilding her brand and rebuilding her wealth? Or will they remain focused on everything that has come before and all of their parents' past mistakes, even if it ultimately means letting go of their parents? So the Pyramid of Needs is asking readers to consider whether the bonds of family are strong and should triumph overall, or if perhaps there are some rifts that are just too big to overcome.
Nailed it. Oh, love it.
Had to add the preamble.
Oh, yeah, no, now I understand. Yeah, that makes complete sense. Preamble makes sense, very valuable. But true to form, you ask tough questions, particularly that kind of a key last point of your pitch is really a key crux of it. This book dives into a lot. We were mentioning just beforehand, you did make me cry once or twice. One out of sadness, but also out of just fury and sheer frustration. You touch on broken relationships, family dynamics. As a precursor, I'll also say there is, transphobia, which it can be very confronting. You bring that unflinchingly to the page. There are some particular scenes that I had some moments. But I also found it fascinating, this examination of parents getting old and how your relationship changes around that. But the first thing that really gripped me about this amazing book was, despite the subject matter, it is also hilarious. This is a really funny book. It's a very dark humor, but there is some really funny moments of humor in this time. And it made me think of a previous conversation that I'd had about how when you are dealing with such intense things, humor can often be that point of a coping mechanism or focus. And considering this book, how important was that element first and foremost? That was the first thing that I kind of gravitated towards, just how these characters function and work and the humor that translates off the page, particularly when you're talking about subject matter like this.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. I think that my personality, and in my day job, I am a teacher. And I think that like a lot of people who work in schools, I rely on that dark sort of sense of humor to deal with, trauma essentially, and other people's trauma. So I think when it comes to my writing, it is often a lens that I find quite easy to adopt for that very reason. I think it's a really natural human reaction for many of us, not everybody, but for many of us, to how we deal and cope with difficult situations. Perhaps it's maladaptive. I don't know. Who am I to say? But I think many of us do it regularly. And I think for me, when I came to try and tackle some of the, as you talked about, some of the thematic content of the book, I didn't want it to be so heavy that it felt insurmountable either to write or to read. So that manner, that almost satirical sort of style, was how I felt like the story was going to best be told and best connect with readers.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you did that, because then that means you find a way in with these particular characters. You jump back and forth between the point of view of the two main characters. Obviously, there are other characters which we'll try and touch on a little bit if we can. But firstly, you have the mother, Linda. I'm not going to lie, I found it quite hard to sympathize with her to begin with, but I felt like that was also colored more by my own experiences with people like that. She's an alternative health guru. She's working on this Supreme Self product that has become everything. She has a very public presence. She's online everywhere. And then she's hit with this challenge of her hip injury. The other part that really I found myself really being drawn to was also the relationship between her and Peter, her partner, who, and we will keep it as spoiler-free as we can, he is facing challenges of his own, very much so. Tell me about this particular dynamic, because this is, you translated it very well to the page, just want to say.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, and I love the way you responded to Linda. I think for me, I was trying so hard not to push her over the brink of caricature. I think she's right on the precipice there. But it was certainly one of the challenges I had when writing Linda. I think that dynamic between her and Peter was really interesting to me, because it's evolved and changed over time, and we get some glimpses back into sort of where it's been. But capturing that dynamic between two people who are at very different places in their lives, still wedded together, was difficult. I originally, when I thought about writing the book and how I was going to structure it, I considered having all 4 members of the Taylor family, so Linda and her husband and Jack and his sister, represented in the sort of structure of the book and a sort of alternating point of view. But ultimately, I felt like Jack and Linda were the ones who were able to give us the insight to the family and to give us that reflection back on Peter. And I think Peter, to me, is a really interesting character. Again, without wanting to go into too many spoilers, has his own dark past, and Jack has his own sort of anger that he holds towards Peter. And I think a lot about, just for myself and all of the mistakes I've made and things I've done in my life, sort of what our long-term accountability is for our actions. And Peter, I don't think we're spoiling too much to say, is in a state of decline in his life and cognitive decline. It's fairly apparent from chapter 1. But I was really interested in, like, what are those questions around, like, how accountable is someone for their past actions in a relationship, in a family, particularly when they're no longer perhaps able to really articulate or do anything about that past.
There is, I love that balance of past and present and how much it is coloured. And again, probably that was the thing that really drew me into Linda, was just those first interactions with Peter, was just where she would kind of say, Peter, you need to go and get the door for me, dear, or you need to show these people out. And I just was going, there's something here. There's not, it's not just the fact that you get the sense that Peter is having his own challenges, in terms of the older he gets, but there's a previous power dynamic that is really clear there, as we also then dive more into how they met, how the connections to that, how Peter is involved with this massive brand that Linda has built. And then the contrast. This is where the contrast with Jack. Teacher, I love that you refer to him at one point as a trans Robin Williams. He describes himself as a trans Robin Williams with the Dead Poets Society connection that has a very in-depth connection and really spills a lot of beans to his therapist, his psychologist, Cameron, almost to the point where he views him like a dad figure, or in some way, kind of describes him at. He's blocked his mum's request to reach out online. He also really tries not to stay as quiet as possible, and because he doesn't go out of his way to show himself so much, because trans people's experiences online is very often absolutely dog shit, and it's also not really. He's also not really on board with the lifestyle that Linda has chosen, and I really got I latched on to Jack a lot quicker, just because of that connection and standpoint. But just the contrast that you had between these two characters, Jack was very interesting.
Yeah, I'm really interested in, I guess, I work with teenagers every day, and I'm really interested in, like, how our identities develop and how they might develop in contrast or connection to our family of origin or the people who raised us, and how that changes over time, and, like, the kind of waves we move in. So I think one of the benefits for me personally of transitioning is, like, you just get this sort of do-over of many things, and you're, like, just sort of starting again. You can make a new email address. You can come up with a new personality, all sorts of things, from the, like, sublime to the ridiculous. And I think that's kind of what Jack has done in many respects. He's used this as sort of a clean slate, I guess, for his family as well as for other aspects of his life. So I think that's a really interesting dynamic. But it does have its parallels in Linda, I think, and Jack's really reluctant to see any parallels between himself and his parents. But I think Linda too is really interested in reinvention and, like, projecting a new identity to the world. So I think, like, there are these parallels. As much as Jack doesn't ever want to see them, they do exist.
Yeah, those parallels come out really quickly, or come through very much as the story is unfolding. And I just, even though they were very different, I could see there's a lot of similarities going on here. But there was obviously a clear lack of understanding and communication of language between the two. And there's again, we'll keep it as vague as possible. There was a particular scene involving a video, which I just thought, oh God. Just that made the language that was used. It really, that particular scene highlighted for me just the damage that you need to make sure that you refer to people correctly and understand their journey and their story properly, because if you don't, it causes so much damage. That particular scene, I just had a bit of a moment of just like, far out. My God.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of these things that happens for Jack, and I think for others, not everybody, but for others in the trans community, is that he kind of writes off a lot of transphobia or misgendering or sort of incidental stuff that happens to him as accidental or as oversight. And when that moment in the text where he sees this video that Linda has created, it feels so much more direct and calculated, and to be much more a kind of core belief for his mother than he might have previously thought. And I think that is really difficult for Jack, because a lot of his ability to cope is predicated on this idea that, yes, they don't understand. Yes, I'm not connected to them, but it's nothing catastrophic. And then he just this moment where it becomes very clear that maybe it is catastrophic.
I also wanted to shout out the Jack's sister, Alice, the other sibling, who purely, and this is me talking with my author brain for a moment, served as just a really fantastic character to ground the reader a little bit, because you have, obviously she's in all of this story with being viewed from the perspective of both Linda and Jack, but she is quite... she's very much present to these two different perspectives and these two different lives and these two different truths that are playing out. And for me, it kind of brought, at least the experience that I had with your book, was that increasingly it was about truth. It was a real element of truth that came through the lives that both Linda and Jack lead, the perceptions of how they are seen both online in their own lives with their family, but also the truths they tell each other and themselves about their own lives, being parents, being sons, everything. It really was kind of going back to that point of there was a lot of parallels. For me, this was kind of a key crux point. It felt like a story about truth and honesty for me when I was reading it and perceiving it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's something I think about every day, like even just in my interactions with other people. You know, we're storytelling creatures. We narrate what has happened to us, and we're so used to narrating that in a way that is favorable often to us and sort of centers our own perspective and sees that as the origin. And I think, yeah, I love your perspective there on Alice in particular, and the way that she is, I guess, moving backwards and forwards between these two very distant versions of reality and what they see and bring.
Out of curiosity, what did writing the book, because I know you've published work before, Overland Queer Stories. Sorry, I've just had a blank. Yeah. What did writing this book, particularly considering the subject matter, of course, there is elements of your own life that you, of course, have put into it. What did it teach you?
What did it teach me? That's an excellent question. It taught me a lot about craft, I think. I sort of, as I mentioned earlier, I had this really ambitious idea about what the book was going to look like. And then I had to reckon with what my own skill level was and my capacity to actually execute that vision. So that was really important for me. The way I write is quite methodical usually. Like I'm quite a planner. And so I had quite an idea of sort of how things were going to unfold structurally. So it became very clear very early that I didn't necessarily have the skill level to execute this 4-perspective magnum opus that I had in my head at the start. But that to me was a really important lesson, because I think I really value prose that is well edited and that has a sort of tightness to it. So that was something I was striving for in my own writing. And I think I learned a lot about that writing this book. The other major thing I think was something you alluded to earlier around, I guess, the use of humor. I'm not sure, you know, there are moments in the book that I still sort of grapple with if I would write them differently now. But I guess just that line between humor and caricature and how to make sure that there's still enough in there that a character is three-dimensional, even when you're sort of looking at them through that satirical lens. But that was super important lessons to learn, and I'm definitely still learning them.
I love talking about creative experiences and actually the process of creating it. Let's quickly dive into talking about the crafting of this book a little bit more, if I can, because I imagine working with a firm on the book would have been a very insightful process both for you and for them, especially because you're bringing to the page experiences that many outside of the trans community really would try to grasp. And a key thing about how valuable this book is that it very much is a walk in my shoes for a bit. And I imagine a firm probably would have really taken a lot from that. It's very hard to really grasp that if you haven't walked a mile in those shoes. What was the actual process of creation like working with a firm?
Yeah, so when a firm picked the book up off what I've been calling the digital slush pile.
Oh, the slush pile.
So I had most of the text written, and by the time it got to that stage, Laura Franks, who was the editor, the structural editor on the work, we didn't do a lot of work from that point forward. But one of the things which was really interesting, and I think really goes to the question you just asked, we had a lot of discussion about misgendering and how to capture that misgendering in the text. So again, I don't think it's too much of a spoiler, but Linda repeatedly misgenders Jack throughout the text, which was a discussion that Laura and I had a quite lengthy discussion about, I guess, how to balance concern for the reader and not wanting to create, an unsafe space in the text for gender diverse or trans readers, but also wanting to render to the page the truth of that misgendering in that relationship. And thirdly, wanting to make sure it was still readable and you could actually figure out what was going on, which, can be difficult when there's misgendering in a text. So that was one of the really useful discussions with a firm about like how we would balance those three competing sort of positions as well. And we talked a lot about, I guess, once the novel was published, what publicity would look like, what points of emphasis a firm would make, I guess, and what I was comfortable with in terms of my own identity and the book itself. So that was a really great sort of backwards and forwards. And yeah, they were fantastic. And that conversation was there from the moment they acquired the novel as well, which was really great.
The spirit to recognize and learn an adventure, I think, is so valuable, and it helps get these stories out there. What is next for you? Will we see? Do you have another book in the pipeline? Do you know what's coming next?
Yeah, I'm working on a novel at the moment. I haven't signed a contract with anyone for it yet. It's not the manuscript is not finished yet, but it is looking, just another light topic, looking at a young person who joins a neo-Nazi group, and looking at the kind of responsibility that the adults in their life have for them under that guise. So the neo-Nazi themselves is not on the page. It's the other characters who are taking center stage. So look, really looking at issues. I'm really interested in issues as a white person who teaches in quite a diverse community. Really interested in thinking about and writing about, I guess, the culpability that white people have for racism and for, I guess, challenging that racism in others. So haven't quite got that pitch down to a minute yet. I'll have to. That's the novel that's underway at the moment.
Wow, I love it. I love that you are just diving straight into that subject matter. And I respect authors that do that. I respect authors that are like, I'm not even going to, some authors would go, okay, I need to be very careful about how we go about this subject matter. God, you've got me excited already. Oh, man.
Yeah, I've got a list of the most controversial issues facing our society, and just going to cross them off one book at a time, maybe.
Love it. Oh, sign me up. Sign me up to all of them. We finish off the podcast discussion with a rapid fire question part of the date. So I hit you with a bunch of questions and you give me the first answers that come to your head. You've had a little bit of a chance to prepare. I've given you a few questions ahead up, and we will start with books, because books are awesome. Okay. Books are fantastic. What is your favorite book that you have read in the last 12 months?
I brought along a display here. Yes. I recently read Erasure by Percival Everett, which I missed when it was initially published. But I watched American Fiction, the adaptation, which has recently been out on the small screen streaming services. Have you read Erasure?
No, I have not. This is all new to me.
So it's wild. It's a wild story about racism in the American literary community. It features a highly literary author who is struggling to get published. He's got a history. He's an academic as well. He writes a sort of somewhat satirical novel that is essentially trying to call the bluff of the publishing community, and they want to take up the book. So it's a book written in like the language of a stereotypical criminal voice, and a fairly racist depiction of a voice. So then sort of madness ensues. It's about a lot of other things as well to do with family, but that's the central line. I love it. A lot of great stuff about race and racism in the literary community. So very, very much recommend it.
Wow, that sounds amazing. Oh my God. Okay, I've got to add that to my TBR.
Put it on the list. Put it on the list.
That pile is getting larger and larger every time I do an episode. All the books sound so good. Do you have a favorite debut novel that you've ever read?
Look, this one was really hard, and I probably could have come up with about 70 different books, and I struggled with what counts as a debut. If they've already published poetry anthologies, does it count when they first write a novel? But I went with just a clean, straight-off first debut. So this is Waiki Wang's Chemistry. I first read this when it was first published. I believe it's being made into a film. It's one of those books that it's like been endorsed by Oprah as well as like high literary awards. So like it's just got the full gamut of endorsements, which I just think is almost impossible to do. So that's pretty incredible. It's about a young woman who is, I guess, like it's almost like a late coming of age story. She's in college. Her boyfriend has proposed to her. She's about to finish a PhD, and she basically quits everything in her life, and life takes a whole other pathway. So it's called Chemistry partially because it has a lot of science in it, but also because it's dealing with all those issues around love. Great book. I love the prose. It's really simple prose. And yeah, it's beautiful.
Sometimes simplicity, like less is more. The whole idea of less is more is completely and utterly true. And sometimes if you ever get lost when you're writing, just make it simple and everything goes forward. Oh, how great. You alluded to earlier that there are a lot of increasingly more and more books that focusing on the trans community, the queer community. There's a lot of great stories out there. For our listeners, could you recommend another book in this particular space that you go, that nails it?
Super interesting question. I guess like there's so much in the form of memoir that people can access. There are a lot of Australian memoirs that you can look into if that is a kind of reading that you are interested in. One of my favorite novels of the past few years, however, is Detransition Baby by Tori Peters, who is a trans writer. It is brilliant. Like it is just a brilliant novel. And I think if you're interested in reading something that is, in a space of looking at issues around trans identities, but not necessarily just solely about that, it deals a lot with all sorts of things around family and friends as well. So I would highly recommend Detransition Baby as another option if people are interested in a novel rather than memoir.
Fantastic. Is there any? I do love novels, but it's kind of interesting that you touched on quite a few of the memoirs. There's a lot of really good ones out there, kind of highlighting and examining that story that is so good. It's a good space at the moment. I just love how many more voices are coming out of it. So many to examine.
Absolutely. And in all sorts of different contexts, whether it's as an Australian context, American, there's a lot of writing out of the UK, but increasingly there's writing out of other places in the world as well that have not traditionally had that same voice on a global stage. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, just plug trans memoirs into your local search engine and you'll be hit with a lot of high quality literature.
There's a lot of great ones. I honestly cannot. The one that I am currently loving, I picked it up recently, Page Boy.
Absolutely.
Elliot Page, unbelievable. It's a book that I wanted to get my hands on for quite a while, and I picked it up quite recently, and just obviously because Elliot is such a high profile A-list actor, even before beforehand, going in and then completing that transition in such a public sphere. Incredibly difficult, but incredibly brave, and such a great book. Personal. I'll throw that out there into the pile as well. One that I'm currently reading and very much enjoying.
Absolutely, and I love Janet Mock's series of memoirs as well, which deal with her experience of race and gender identity and the intersection there as well. There's a great anthology called Nothing to Hide, which is the tagline is Voices of Trans and Gender Diverse Australia, which is an edited collection, an anthology of a range of different trans and gender diverse voices. And there's some really powerful pieces in there as well, if people are interested in that kind of writing.
Oh, I love it. Oh, could keep going with recommendations. I love book chats. You'll go down a rabbit hole. Do you have a favourite word?
Oh, a favourite word? I don't know if I do. It
could be anything. So it could be like a word that you like to say, you like the meaning behind it, you like it because it's satisfying to shout in an exclamation, it's a swear word, like anything.
I definitely think like simplicity, and the idea of simplicity is an idea that is very important to me. So maybe that is my key word.
That's a good word. I like
What's your favourite word?
I kind of am alternating back and forth. For a while, succulent was my favourite word, just because it had different phases and feelings to it as you were saying it, but also the different things that you could use to describe as succulent. But I've kind of been just diving into massive longer words, and I rediscovered discombobulate.
Great word.
Which was just such a... I don't know why. I think I was watching the Sherlock Holmes with Robert Downey Jr. a little while ago, and he says discombobulate in such a satisfying way. And then I went, oh, God, yeah, okay, I could go down all of those crazy words of like supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, and then all of a sudden, Lord knows where I am. But, there's so many good words out there. You get into a lift, and your absolute hero is in there. Who is it?
Oh... all I can think of is basketballers now, because I'm a basketball obsessed, and I was expecting some high literary figure. Can they be dead? I mean, I think Toni Morrison.
Absolutely.
Toni Morrison, James Baldwin, any of those writers who are just, beyond iconic. They would probably be my first preference. After that, any NBA basketball player, I'll share with you.
Such a contrast. I love it. You've got time for one question to ask them. Like, what is it? Not what floor you're going to.
maybe just what's on your mind, because I think for both Toni Morrison and James Baldwin, I could hear them talk about anything. What's on your mind? What do you have to say for to us today? Because I think whatever they were thinking about and writing about was always so prescient and important and definitive. I can't think of it. I guess more important set of people. So I'd really be willing to listen to whatever it was they thought I needed to hear.
Oh, I love that. That's nice. Just what's on your mind. I like it. That's good. Last question. Are you happy?
Well, look, it's the end of a very long work week. So I'm not sure how to answer that. Is that a positive? No, I am happy. I just feel so privileged with everything that's happened with the book. I had a beautiful launch event in Naarm with just so many wonderful people who came, and I had it on the last day of term 1 in Victoria, and so many of my colleagues and friends and former students came, and it was just the most beautiful atmosphere. I remember basically nothing of it, but it did fill me with such extreme happiness and just such gratitude for the experience. So yes, I am happy.
Ernest Price is happy, and Ernest Price is okay. That is all I need to know. I could honestly chat to you all day. I honestly could, but unfortunately, we have run out of time. Thank you so much. And to everyone who is listening, get yourself a copy of The Pyramid of Needs. It is a book that you absolutely must read. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Date with a Debut, and for listening to the Words and Nerds channel. You can buy all books mentioned in today's episode down in the description box. And if you enjoyed the show, or indeed any episode of Words and Nerds, drop us a review, leave us 5 stars or a thumbs up. It is hugely appreciated. Catch you soon.